My name is Wilhelmina, and at 32 years old, I never expected my life to take such a dramatic turn. After leaving my prestigious corporate law firm to start my own practice, I thought I had my parents' full support. We were always close until a dispute over the family business changed everything. When my mother's message appeared on my phone, "We no longer trust you," my heart shattered. My simple response of "understood" was meant to end the conversation, not set off a chain reaction that would bring their entire world crashing down. Let me tell you where things went so terribly wrong. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if family drama and unexpected legal twists interest you. I grew up in a beautiful colonial-style home in Greenwich, Connecticut, with the kind of childhood most people would envy. My parents, Martha and Richard Thompson, built their success from nothing but determination and vision. What started as a single specialty grocery store in downtown Greenwich eventually grew into a chain of 15 locations across New England. Thompson's Fine Foods became known for its curated selection of gourmet imports and locally sourced products, earning a reputation that made my parents respected fixtures in the community. Family always came first in our household. Despite their busy schedules managing an expanding business, my parents never missed a school play piano recital or academic competition. Weekends were sacred family time, whether we were sailing on Long Island Sound in summer or taking ski trips to Vermont in winter. Sunday dinners were non-negotiable, with lively conversations about books, current events, and our dreams for the future. My mother, Martha, with her warm smile and impeccable taste, handled the customer experience and product selection aspects of the business. She had an uncanny ability to predict food trends months before they hit the mainstream. My father, Richard, analytical and strategic, managed the financial and operational side. Together, they were an unstoppable team complementing each other's strengths perfectly. From an early age, I showed an aptitude for debate and analysis that made my father joke I was destined to become a lawyer. While most kids were watching cartoons, I was fascinated by courtroom dramas and would often stage mock trials for my stuffed animals. My academic achievements came naturally, valedictorian of my high school class, summa cum laude at Yale, and then Harvard Law School, where I graduated near the top of my class. My parents never hid their hope that I would eventually join the family business. They had visions of me handling the legal affairs and expansion strategy as Thompson's Fine Foods grew even larger. "Why work for someone else when you could build your own legacy right here?" my father would say, gesturing around our flagship store during my visits home from college. But corporate law called to me. The complexity, the high stakes, the intellectual challenge, I craved it all. Breaking the news that I had accepted an associate position at Harrington and Reed, one of New York's most prestigious law firms, was the first major disappointment I ever gave my parents. "I just don't understand Willie," my mother said, using my childhood nickname. "You could have such freedom here building something meaningful with family." "This is something I need to do for myself," I explained. "I need to know I can succeed on my own merits, not as the boss's daughter." They eventually came around, celebrating my achievements as I climbed the ranks at the firm. When I made junior partner in record time, they hosted an elaborate dinner party at their home, inviting all their friends to toast my success. "We always knew she was destined for greatness," my father announced proudly, raising his glass. Throughout those early years of my career, I maintained a close relationship with my family. The 2-hour train ride from Manhattan to Greenwich became a bi-weekly ritual. I'd arrive on Friday evening for dinner stay through Saturday and return to my apartment on Sunday afternoon, refreshed and reconnected. My brother Jackson was a different story altogether. 3 years my senior, he had joined the family business straight out of his business administration program at Boston University. While I was building my reputation in Manhattan legal circles, Jackson was learning every aspect of our parents' business, from inventory management to vendor relationships. On the surface, we maintained a cordial relationship, but there was always an undercurrent of competition between us. Jackson would make subtle comments about my absence from family affairs, while I would occasionally question some of his business decisions when reviewing the company's quarterly reports during my visits. Not everyone needs an Ivy League education to understand how things work in the real world, he once remarked during a tense discussion about expansion plans. And not every business decision should be made based on gut feelings alone. I countered, pointing to the market analysis I had brought along. Looking back, I should have recognized these moments as warning signs of deeper issues brewing beneath the surface. But family dynamics can blind us to what might be obvious to outsiders. I dismissed these tensions as normal sibling rivalry, never imagining they would one day explode into something that would threaten to tear our family apart forever. There were other signs too: hushed conversations between my parents that would stop when I entered the room, sudden cancellations of our traditional Sunday brunches, and increasingly vague answers when I asked specific questions about the business. At the time, I attributed these changes to the natural evolution of our adult relationships and the growing pains of a successful family enterprise. How wrong I was. After 7 years at Harrington and Reed, I felt the increasing weight of corporate politics and the moral compromises required to keep climbing the ladder. I had successfully represented several high-profile clients in complex cases, earning a reputation as a formidable presence in the courtroom. But something was missing. The work had become routine, and I longed for cases that aligned more closely with my personal values. One spring evening, after winning a major case for a pharmaceutical client with questionable ethics, I sat alone in my office overlooking Manhattan. The victory champagne remained uncorked as I stared at the city lights below, questioning whether this was truly the path I wanted to continue on. By morning, I had made my decision. I would start my own practice, focusing on cases I believed in rather than simply those that paid the highest retainer. When I called my parents to share my decision, they surprised me with their enthusiasm. "You've always been independent, Willie," my father said. "It's about time you took that spirit and created something of your own." My mother chimed in, "And now that you'll have more control over your schedule, perhaps we'll see you more often." Their support meant everything to me. For the next 3 months, I worked diligently to wrap up my obligations at the firm while setting up my new practice. I leased a modest office space in downtown Manhattan, hired a paralegal fresh out of school, and began reaching out to contacts who might provide referrals. The transition was challenging but exhilarating. Just 2 weeks after opening Thompson Legal, my father called with what seemed like a casual request. "Willie, your mother and I have been thinking it might be wise to have you look over some of our business contracts. Nothing urgent, but since you're on your own now, we'd like to keep more legal matters in the family." Naturally, I was delighted by the opportunity to finally contribute to the family business, even if only as outside counsel. "Of course, Dad. Send everything over and I'll review it this weekend." The documents arrived via courier the next day, a large envelope containing contracts, financial statements, and corporate filings. What started as a routine review quickly raised red flags. The company's cash flow statements showed irregularities, large sums moving through accounts that didn't align with the business operations I was familiar with. Several new shell companies had been formed with vague business purposes. Most concerning were a series of consulting agreements with exorbitant fees paid to global business advisors, a company I had never heard mentioned in family discussions. I spent the entire weekend analyzing the documents, making detailed notes, and researching the entities involved. By Sunday evening, my concern had grown to genuine alarm. Either the family business was being grossly mismanaged, or something more sinister was occurring. I decided a face-to-face conversation was necessary. Rather than calling ahead, I drove to Greenwich early Monday morning, arriving at my parents' home just as they were finishing breakfast. "Willie, what a surprise," my mother said, clearly startled by my unannounced visit. "Is everything all right?" "I'm not sure," I replied honestly, placing my portfolio on their kitchen table. "I've been reviewing the documents Dad sent, and there are some issues we need to discuss." My father's expression shifted from welcome to wariness. "What kind of issues?" I carefully explained my findings, keeping my tone professional and matter-of-fact. "There are significant discrepancies in the financial reporting, Dad, and these consulting fees over $2 million in the past year to global business advisors. What services exactly are they providing?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My parents exchanged glances before my father cleared his throat. "These are complex business matters, Wilhelmina. Gerald has assured us that everything is being handled appropriately." "Gerald?" I asked, confused. "Gerald Maxwell," my mother explained. "Our business advisor for the past 3 years. He's been instrumental in our recent growth." I had never heard this name before, despite my regular involvement in family discussions about the business. "And you trust this advisor with transactions of this magnitude without independent verification? We don't appreciate your tone," my father responded, his voice hardening. "Gerald is a close family friend and a financial genius. Just because you have a law degree doesn't mean you understand the intricacies of running our business." Their defensive reaction caught me off guard. Throughout my life, my parents had always been open to discussion and valued my opinion. This sudden wall of resistance was completely out of character. "I'm not questioning your business acumen," I assured them. I'm simply pointing out potential legal vulnerabilities that could put everything you've built at risk." The conversation deteriorated from there. My parents refused to discuss specifics, insisting that I was overstepping my boundaries. By the time I left, the tension was palpable, and for the first time in my life, I drove away from my childhood home, feeling like an outsider. In the weeks that followed, family gatherings became increasingly strained. Jackson, who had always been somewhat competitive with me now, seemed openly hostile. During a Thanksgiving dinner that should have been filled with warmth and gratitude, the underlying tensions finally erupted. "Maybe if you spent more time supporting the family instead of criticizing from your ivory tower in Manhattan, you'd understand what we're trying to accomplish," Jackson snapped after I innocently asked about a new store location. "I'm trying to protect this family and the business," I countered, struggling to keep my voice calm. "Has anyone even performed due diligence on these investment vehicles Gerald has created?" "That's enough," my father interjected, slamming his hand on the table hard enough to make the crystal water glasses jump. "We will not discuss business at this table, and we certainly won't question Gerald's expertise." I noticed my mother's discomfort and the quick, worried glance she exchanged with my father. Something wasn't right, and my legal instincts were screaming that this Gerald Maxwell had an unhealthy influence on my family. That evening, I made the decision to investigate further, despite my parents' objections. If they wouldn't protect themselves, then I would have to do it for them, even if it temporarily damaged our relationship. Little did I know just how severe that damage would become. With my parents and brother unwilling to discuss my concerns openly, I turned to what I do best: meticulous research and investigation. Using my legal resources and connections, I began quietly looking into both the Thompson's Fine Foods finances and the mysterious Gerald Maxwell. What I discovered was deeply troubling. Through careful analysis of public records and business filings, I traced a pattern of funds being systematically diverted from the family business through the shell companies I had identified earlier. These funds, totaling nearly $8 million over 3 years, eventually made their way to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Belize. The paperwork had been cleverly constructed to appear legitimate on the surface, with consulting agreements and investment vehicles that would pass a cursory inspection. But when examined in detail, it was clear that no actual services or investments were being provided. The entire structure existed solely to siphon money from my parents' legitimate business. Gerald Maxwell himself had a history that should have raised immediate red flags. He had operated under 3 different names in the past 15 years and had been investigated, though never charged, in connection with 2 other financial schemes involving family-owned businesses. He specialized in gaining the trust of successful business owners, positioning himself as a financial guru who could multiply their wealth through exclusive investment opportunities. Most shocking of all was the discovery that my brother Jackson's signature appeared on many of the questionable documents. Whether he was an active participant in the scheme or merely a useful pawn in Gerald's game wasn't immediately clear, but his involvement was undeniable. I struggled with this knowledge for days, wrestling with my professional ethics and family loyalty. As an attorney, I had a duty to report potential financial crimes. As a daughter and sister, I wanted to protect my family from both legal consequences and public embarrassment. After consulting confidentially with a former professor who specialized in legal ethics, I decided that my first obligation was to present my findings directly to my parents, giving them the opportunity to address the situation legally and voluntarily. I prepared a comprehensive presentation with all the evidence I had gathered, careful to focus on the facts rather than accusations. I called my parents and requested a private meeting at their home, emphasizing the seriousness of what I needed to discuss. They reluctantly agreed, though my father made it clear he considered the matter closed. That Saturday, I arrived at their house with my laptop and a thick folder of documents. We sat in my father's wood-panelled study, the room where he had once helped me with math homework and later celebrated my law school acceptance. Now it felt like an adversarial space, with my parents seated together on one side of the desk and me on the other. "I know you think I'm overstepping," I began, "but what I've discovered goes beyond ordinary business concerns. Please just look at the evidence before you make any judgments." For the next hour, I methodically walked them through the paper trail, showing how their legitimate business funds were being systematically drained. I explained the red flags in Gerald's background and the suspicious pattern of transactions. "And Jackson's involvement?" my mother asked quietly when I mentioned his signatures, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know the extent of his knowledge," I answered honestly. Best case scenario, he's signing documents without understanding their implications. Worst case, I couldn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavily in the air. I expected shock anger at Gerald, perhaps even gratitude for uncovering the scheme. What I received instead was something far more painful. "How dare you?" my father said, his voice ice cold. "How dare you come into our home and accuse us of being too stupid to manage our own affairs?" "Dad, that's not what I'm saying at all. It sounds to me," my mother interjected, "like you're jealous of the business's success under Gerald's guidance, maybe even jealous of Jackson's position in the company." I stared at them in disbelief. "You think this is about jealousy? I'm showing you documented evidence of financial fraud. What you're showing us are legitimate business transactions that you're twisting because you don't understand modern investment strategies," my father countered. Before I could respond, the study door opened and Gerald Maxwell himself walked in. He was a tall, impeccably dressed man with silver hair and the practiced smile of a seasoned salesman. I had never met him before, but I recognized him immediately from the photos I had found during my investigation. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said smoothly, though the timing of his arrival suggested this was a planned intervention. "Richard mentioned you had concerns about the business structure, Wilhelmina. I thought I might be able to clarify things." The casual familiarity with which he entered my parents' home and the way my parents immediately deferred to his presence told me everything I needed to know about the depth of his influence. Before I could respond, Jackson burst into the room, his face flushed with anger. "I just got your text, Dad. Is she really accusing me of stealing after everything I've done for this family while she's been playing big shot lawyer in the city?" The situation escalated rapidly, with Jackson shouting accusations about my motives, Gerald calmly suggesting I was misinterpreting normal business operations, and my parents looking increasingly distressed but unwilling to consider my evidence. "If you persist with these ridiculous allegations," Jackson finally threatened, leaning across the desk toward me, "you'll destroy this family and the business." "Is that what you want? To tear down everything Mum and Dad have built, because you can't stand that I'm the one who stayed to help them succeed?" Tears welled in my eyes, not from intimidation, but from the painful realization that I couldn't reach them. They were so thoroughly under Gerald's influence that they couldn't or wouldn't see the danger they were in. "I'm trying to protect you," I said, my voice breaking as I gathered my documents. "All of you, but I can't help if you won't let me." I left my parents' home that day feeling utterly defeated, the weight of knowledge heavy on my shoulders and my heart broken by their rejection. What I didn't know then was that this painful confrontation was just the beginning of an even more difficult journey. The week following the confrontation at my parents' home was the longest of my life. I called them daily, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as they went unreturned. Each call ended the same way: "Mum, Dad, please call me back. We need to talk about this. I'm worried about you." I tried reaching out to Jackson separately, hoping that without our parents and Gerald present, he might be more receptive. The text I sent him was careful and conciliatory. "Jackson, I'm not trying to accuse you of anything. I'm genuinely concerned about what's happening with the business. Can we talk privately? Just you and me." His response came hours later, a single line that cut deep. "Stay out of things you don't understand. You've done enough damage." After 5 days of silence from my parents, I was seriously considering driving to Greenwich and camping outside their house until they agreed to talk to me. But before I could act on that impulse, my phone chimed with a text message from my mother. I nearly dropped the phone in my haste to open it, relief washing over me that she had finally reached out. That relief evaporated instantly when I read her words. "We've discussed everything as a family with Gerald and Jackson. We no longer trust you. Please don't contact us again until you've reconsidered your accusations. Mum." The message might as well have been a physical blow. I sat down hard on my office couch, struggling to breathe as the implications sank in. My own family was cutting me off. The people who had celebrated every achievement, bandaged every scraped knee, and supported every dream were now treating me like an enemy. For hours I stared at that message, drafting and deleting dozens of responses. I wanted to plead, to argue, to lay out my evidence again, in the hope that something would finally get through to them. But ultimately, I recognized that continuing to push would only drive them further away. They needed time to see Gerald for who he truly was, and my interference was only strengthening his position. With a heavy heart, I typed a single word in response: "Understood." That simple acknowledgement wasn't surrender, it was strategy. If they wouldn't listen to me as their daughter, Perhaps they would eventually have to listen to me as an attorney. And for that to happen, I needed to protect myself legally, while creating a record of everything that had transpired. The next morning, I called Amanda Jeffries, a highly respected attorney who specialized in financial crimes and who had been a mentor to me since law school. Over coffee in her corner office overlooking Central Park, I laid out the entire situation, holding nothing back. "So what you're telling me," Amanda said after listening intently, "is that you've discovered what appears to be significant financial fraud targeting your family's business, but your family has rejected your help and essentially cut contact with you." "That's the situation," I confirmed. "And you want my advice on next steps?" "I need to know what my legal and ethical obligations are, and I need someone I trust to help me navigate this without causing my family more pain than necessary." Amanda leaned back in her chair considering. "Your primary ethical obligation as an attorney who has discovered potential financial crimes is clear. Normally, I would recommend reporting this to the appropriate authorities immediately." My stomach clenched at the thought of my parents and possibly Jackson facing legal consequences. And the alternative: document everything, create a comprehensive record of what you've discovered and your attempts to address it within the family. Then give them a little time to come to their senses. She held up a hand when I began to object. "A little time, Wilhelmina. Not indefinitely. Financial crimes of this magnitude tend to accelerate once the perpetrator believes they've neutralized any threats to their operation." "Kakwaisem." I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her advice. "How long, Sim?" 2 weeks. If you haven't seen any indication that your family is addressing the situation, by then we move to more direct intervention. That afternoon, I began methodically documenting everything, creating detailed timelines, organizing evidence, and writing precise accounts of every conversation. I also took the precaution of submitting an anonymous tip to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, providing just enough information to put Gerald Maxwell on their radar without directly implicating my family. The next few days were a blur of legal work and emotional processing. By day, I maintained a professional facade, meeting with clients and building my practice. By night, I alternated between working on the documentation and allowing myself to grieve the sudden estrangement from my family. Friends noticed the change in me, the shadows under my eyes, and the absence of my usual enthusiasm. I shared only vague explanations about family disagreements, unwilling to burden them with the full weight of what was happening. Only my closest friend Sophia knew the truth, providing a shoulder to cry on during my darkest moments. "They'll realize you were right," she assured me one evening as we sat on my apartment balcony sharing a bottle of wine. "You just have to give them time to see through this man's manipulation." "What if they don't?" I whispered, giving voice to my deepest fear. "What if this destroys our relationship permanently? Then you'll know you did everything possible to protect them, even at the cost of your relationship." Sophia replied, squeezing my hand. "But I don't believe it will come to that. The truth has a way of revealing itself, especially when money is involved." I clung to that hope during the long, sleepless nights that followed, trying to focus on the belief that eventually my parents would see Gerald for who he truly was. I just prayed that realization wouldn't come too late, after he had drained their business and disappeared with everything they'd spent their lives building. As it turned out, I didn't have to wait long for the situation to reach its breaking point. Just 2 days after my mother's text and my simple understood response, the fragile house of cards Gerald had constructed began its spectacular collapse. The morning started like any other since my estrangement from my family, with a heaviness in my chest and the disciplined compartmentalization that allowed me to function professionally despite my personal heartache. I was reviewing a contract for a new client when my office phone rang. My paralegal, Zoe's voice came through the intercom. "Wilhelmina, there's a Thomas Bradford on line 1. He says he's your parents' attorney and it's urgent." My pulse quickened. Thomas Bradford was indeed my parents' longtime lawyer, handling their estate planning and basic business matters. We had met several times at family events and professional functions. But why would he be calling me now? "Put him through," I instructed, straightening in my chair and switching instantly into professional mode. "Wilhelmina, Tom Bradford here." His normally composed voice sounded strained. "I need to meet with you immediately. It's regarding your parents and Thompson's Fine Foods." "What's happened?" I asked, alarm rising. "Not over the phone," he insisted. "How soon can you meet? I'll come to you. I can clear my schedule for the next 2 hours. I'll be there in 30 minutes. True to his word, Thomas arrived at my office precisely half an hour later. The always immaculate attorney looked disheveled, his tie slightly askew and his normally perfect silver hair uncombed. As soon as my door closed behind him, he began speaking rapidly. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network has frozen all accounts associated with Thompson's Fine Foods, pending an investigation into suspected money laundering and wire fraud. He dropped into the chair across from my desk. They arrived at the corporate offices yesterday afternoon with subpoenas for all financial records. Your parents called me in a panic. Despite having anticipated something like this, since discovering the irregularities, hearing it confirmed sent a wave of nausea through me. What about Gerald Maxwell? I asked. Thomas's expression darkened. Disappeared, cleaned out his apartment, and hasn't been seen since the day before the investigators showed up. Almost as if he had advance warning. He gave me a pointed look. I met his gaze steadily. I submitted an anonymous tip about suspicious financial activities without specifically naming my family's business. If Gerald had monitoring systems in place, he might have been alerted when inquiries began. Your brother Jackson confessed everything to your parents last night, Thomas continued. Apparently, Gerald had convinced him that these financial structures were cutting-edge tax minimization strategies used by all major corporations. Jackson signed documents without fully understanding their implications, trusting Gerald's expertise. The revelation confirmed my suspicion that Jackson had been manipulated rather than willingly participating in fraud. It was small comfort given the severity of their situation. How bad is it? I asked. Bad, Thomas admitted grimly. Preliminary assessment suggests Gerald has diverted approximately $12 million over 4 years. The business is in immediate danger of collapse without access to operating capital, and there could be criminal charges for your parents and Jackson if they can't demonstrate they were victims rather than co-conspirators. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think like an attorney rather than a daughter. What exactly do you need from me, Tom? He leaned forward, desperation evident in his expression. Your expertise in financial law, your detailed knowledge of the business, and frankly, your previous attempts to warn them about Gerald. Your documentation of your concerns could be crucial in establishing that they were victims of sophisticated fraud rather than willing participants. They rejected my help, I reminded him, old pain flaring. My mother explicitly told me not to contact them again. They were wrong, Thomas said bluntly. They know that now. Your father is too proud to say it directly, but they need you, Wilhelmina. The family business, their legacy, everything is at stake. I sat in silence for a long moment, processing this dramatic reversal. Part of me, the wounded daughter, wanted to refuse to let them experience the consequences of dismissing my concerns so completely. But the larger part, the one that still loved them, despite everything, couldn't turn away from their need. I'll help, I finally said, but on my terms. I need full access to all financial records, complete honesty from everyone involved, and final authority on legal strategy. I won't be undermined or second-guessed while trying to clean up this mess. Thomas nodded quickly. They'll agree to whatever you need. The situation is dire enough that pride is no longer a factor. Arrange a meeting at their home this evening, I instructed. Everyone needs to be present, my parents, Jackson, you and me. 7 o'clock. After Thomas left, I sat motionless at my desk, emotions warring within me. There was no satisfaction in being proven right, only concern for my family and determination to protect them from both legal consequences and financial ruin. I spent the remainder of the day reviewing relevant laws and precedents, and steeling myself for the difficult reunion ahead. Driving to my parents' home that evening felt surreal. The familiar route was unchanged, but everything else had shifted dramatically. As I pulled into their driveway, I noticed the curtains move, someone watching for my arrival. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my briefcase and approached the front door. It opened before I could knock. My mother stood there looking years older than when I'd last seen her just a week ago. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her usually perfect makeup absent. Willie? She whispered, her voice breaking on my nickname. I maintained my professional demeanor, knowing I needed emotional distance to handle what came next effectively. Hello, Mother. Everyone's waiting inside. She nodded, stepping back to let me enter. In the living room, my father sat slumped in his favorite leather chair, a tumbler of scotch clutched in his hand. Jackson paced by the fireplace, while Thomas stood near the window. All eyes turned to me as I entered. The tension in the room was palpable, shame, fear, and desperation radiating from my family members. My father opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it, seemingly unable to find the right words. I understand we have a significant legal and financial crisis to address. I said, breaking the uncomfortable silence and placing my briefcase on the coffee table. Let's focus on solutions rather than recriminations. I'll need complete honesty from all of you if I'm going to help. And with that businesslike introduction, I took charge of the situation, establishing clear boundaries while extending the professional lifeline they so desperately needed. It wasn't forgiveness that would come much later. It was something more immediate and practical, a daughter using her expertise to protect her family despite the pain they had caused her. Over the next 2 weeks, I virtually lived at my parents' house, converting my father's study into a war room for our legal defense and financial recovery efforts. My own practice was temporarily put on hold, with my paralegal Zoe handling routine matters and rescheduling non-urgent appointments. This crisis demanded my full attention. My first priority was working with federal investigators to establish my family as victims rather than perpetrators. I provided my documented concerns and evidence that I had attempted to warn them about Gerald's suspicious activities. This crucial groundwork helped shift the investigation's focus away from my family and squarely onto Gerald Maxwell. The hardest conversations happened during those first few days. I needed to understand exactly how Gerald had manipulated each family member, which required painful admissions from everyone. My father, always proud and self-assured, struggled the most with acknowledging his vulnerability. We sat late one night in his study, surrounded by financial documents, when he finally broke down. "I built this business from nothing," he said, his voice ragged. Then this smooth-talking financial genius comes along, flattering me about my success, promising to multiply our wealth through investments that seemed too sophisticated for me to fully understand. I was too embarrassed to admit I didn't comprehend what he was proposing, so I just nodded and signed where he indicated. "He exploited your pride," I said gently. "That's a common tactic in these schemes." My mother's manipulation had been more emotional. Gerald always emphasized how his strategies would secure your and Jackson's future, she explained one morning as we reviewed bank statements. He'd say things like, "Don't you want to leave your children the strongest possible legacy?" He made it feel like questioning him meant I didn't care enough about my family's future. Jackson's confrontation was the most volatile. When I pressed him about his signatures on key documents, his initial defensiveness erupted into anger. "You think I knowingly helped him steal from our parents?" he shouted, pacing my makeshift office. He convinced me these were standard industry practices. He had answers for everything, credentials that checked out references. I verified myself. By the time I started having serious doubts, I was already so deeply involved that I feared coming forward would implicate me. "Why didn't you come to me with those doubts?" I asked the question that had been burning inside me. Jackson stopped pacing, his shoulders slumping. "Because you were always the smart one, the successful one." Admitting I'd been fooled so completely, I couldn't bear for you to see me that way. These painful conversations gradually cleared the air, allowing us to work together more effectively to address the crisis. With a clearer understanding of Gerald's methods, I was able to develop a comprehensive legal strategy. Working with financial forensic experts, we traced the path of diverted funds through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. Gerald had been thorough, but not infallible. We discovered a pattern in his banking activities that suggested he had used similar methods with previous victims. When I presented this information to the lead federal investigator, he confirmed my suspicion. "Maxwell has done this before, but never at this scale. His previous targets lost between $1 and $3 million each. Your family business was his biggest score yet." "Do you have any leads on his whereabouts?" I asked. "Nothing concrete. We believe he's left the country, possibly to a non-extradition territory." This news was disheartening but not surprising. I had anticipated Gerald would flee with as much money as he could liquidate quickly. However, I had a theory about where some of the remaining funds might be found. Through careful analysis of Gerald's known associates and past travel patterns, I identified a property in Belize, registered to a company with connections to one of his aliases. Working with international legal contacts, I arranged for local authorities to investigate the property, where they discovered documentation leading to several hidden accounts containing approximately $4 million of the stolen funds. The day I received confirmation of this discovery, I called an emergency family meeting. Gathered around the kitchen table, the heart of our home, where so many family decisions had been made over the years, I shared the news. "We've located about 1/3 of the stolen money," I announced. "The recovery process will take time, but this is a significant breakthrough." The relief on my parents' faces was palpable. My father reached across the table and took my hand, the first real physical contact since our estrangement. "How did you know where to look when federal investigators couldn't find him?" he asked, genuine admiration in his voice. "I didn't just look at his financial patterns," I explained. "I studied his personal habits, his vacation preferences, the restaurants he frequented, even his clothing brands. People like Gerald are creatures of comfort and routine, even when they're on the run." Meanwhile, the business faced immediate operational challenges due to the frozen accounts. I negotiated with regulators to release limited funds for essential operations while the investigation continued. To address cash flow issues, I structured short-term loans from trusted business associates who had known my parents for decades and believed in their integrity. The potential public relations disaster was another critical concern. Local media had begun reporting on the investigation, creating uncertainty among customers, suppliers, and employees. I crafted a transparent communication strategy, acknowledging the situation while emphasizing that the business had been victimized by a sophisticated financial criminal. We held town hall meetings with employees personally, called key suppliers, and published an open letter to customers in local newspapers. This approach, honest but carefully framed, helped maintain essential business relationships during the crisis. Most suppliers agreed to extended payment terms. Employees rallied around the family, and customer loyalty remained strong, particularly in the communities where Thompson's Fine Foods had been a fixture for generations. 3 weeks into the crisis, during a late-night strategy session in the family kitchen, a breakthrough moment occurred. We were all exhausted, surrounded by empty coffee cups and takeout containers, when my mother suddenly put down her pen and looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to begin to thank you," she said. "After how we treated you, most people would have walked away and let us face this alone." My father, usually so stoic, cleared his throat. "We failed you, Willie. We chose to believe a stranger over our own daughter." "You didn't just doubt me," I said quietly, finally giving voice to the hurt I'd been suppressing while focusing on the legal issues. "You accused me of being jealous and trying to undermine the business. You cut me off completely." "We were wrong," Jackson admitted, meeting my eyes directly. "Completely unforgivably wrong." The honest acknowledgement broke something open inside me. For the first time since the crisis began, I allowed myself to cry in front of them, releasing weeks of accumulated tension, hurt, and fear. That night marked the beginning of our family's healing, not just addressing the business crisis, but the deeper fractures in our relationships. It was also the night I agreed to step in temporarily as Chief Legal Officer for Thompson's Fine Foods, making official what had already become my de facto role during the crisis. The decision wasn't easy. My own practice would have to be placed on extended hold, and working so closely with my family carried emotional risks. But the business needed legal guidance it could trust absolutely, and after everything that had happened, there was no one my family trusted more than me. "It's just until we stabilize," I told them. 6 months, maybe a year. My father nodded, understanding the magnitude of what I was offering. "Whatever time you can give us will be a gift we don't deserve but desperately need." As I drove back to Manhattan in the early morning hours to pack essentials for an extended stay in Connecticut, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. The text message that had shattered my heart, "We no longer trust you," had set in motion a chain of events that ultimately strengthened both the family business and our bonds with each other. Sometimes I realized a simple "understood" isn't an acceptance of defeat, but the beginning of a different kind of victory. 6 months after Gerald Maxwell's fraud was discovered, Thompson's Fine Foods had not merely survived, it was thriving under a new model of transparency and collaborative leadership. The journey hadn't been easy, but the transformation of both the business and our family relationships was remarkable. My temporary role as Chief Legal Officer gradually evolved into something more permanent and meaningful. While maintaining my own practice in a reduced capacity, I established comprehensive legal safeguards for the family business, including a system of checks and balances that would prevent any single person from having unchecked financial authority again. The federal investigation continued with Gerald still at large, but a significant portion of the stolen funds recovered and restored to the business. Through diligent forensic accounting and legal pressure on institutions that had facilitated his scheme, we ultimately recovered nearly $7 million of the $12 million that had been diverted. Rather than trying to hide the fraud, we took the opposite approach, becoming advocates for small business protection against sophisticated financial crimes. My father began speaking at business conferences about their experience, warning other family-owned companies about the warning signs they had missed. The transparency about our own vulnerability ironically strengthened public trust in Thompson's Fine Foods, with sales actually increasing in the months following the crisis. Jackson underwent the most profound transformation. The experience of being manipulated by Gerald and then having to face the consequences humbled him in ways nothing else could have. He threw himself into learning every aspect of the business, legitimately, often seeking my input on decisions he would have previously made unilaterally. One autumn afternoon, as we walked through the original store location, doing inventory, he surprised me with an unexpected apology. "I've been thinking about our relationship over the years," he said, pausing beside a display of imported olive oils. "Long before Gerald came along, I was competitive with you in ways that weren't healthy, always trying to prove myself, always resenting how easily things seemed to come to you." "Things weren't easy," I corrected gently. "I just made it look that way because I thought that's what everyone expected of me." He nodded thoughtfully. "I see that now, but it took nearly losing everything to understand that we're stronger together than we ever were competing against each other." The reconciliation with my parents developed more gradually. The initial crisis had necessitated putting aside personal feelings to address immediate problems, but the deeper healing took time and intentional effort from all of us. My mother and I began having weekly lunches, just the two of us, away from the business context. During these meals, we slowly rebuilt our relationship, discussing not just family matters, but our individual hopes, fears, and interests. I discovered aspects of her life and personality I had never fully appreciated before, like her passion for community development and her secret dream of writing a cookbook. "I always saw you as this perfect extension of Dad and me," she confessed during one such lunch. "Brilliant, driven, always achieving. I never considered that you might need protection or support in your own way. And I thought you and Dad were infallible," I admitted. Finding out you could be misled so completely was almost as shocking as the fraud itself. "We're all just humans doing our best," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Sometimes our best isn't very good, but that's when family becomes most important." My father's style of reconciliation was more practical. He began including me in all major business decisions, not just legal matters, truly valuing my input in a way he never had before. He also made a point of acknowledging my contributions publicly, ensuring that employees, vendors, and customers understood the crucial role I had played in saving the business. Our most meaningful conversation happened during a fishing trip to the small lake, where he had taught me to fish as a child. As we sat in comfortable silence, lines cast into the still water, he finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Your mother's text message," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you to know I was against sending it. Not because I didn't share the sentiment at the time, God forgive me I did, but because something felt fundamentally wrong about cutting off communication with my own daughter." "Why didn't you stop it?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "Because I was afraid. Afraid you might be right about Gerald, afraid of what that would mean for everything we'd built, afraid of having to admit I'd been fooled. Fear makes cowards of us all, Willie. Fear makes humans of us all," I corrected. "The courage comes in what we do next." He nodded, blinking rapidly against unexpected tears. "You showed extraordinary courage, coming back to help us after how we treated you. I don't know if I could have done the same in your position." "You would have," I said with certainty. "Because that's what you taught me. Family does. We show up for each other, especially when it's difficult." The first holiday gathering after the crisis was a poignant milestone. Thanksgiving had always been our family's most cherished celebration, and the previous year's tense dinner had marked the beginning of our estrangement. This year, as we gathered around the same dining table, there was a palpable sense of gratitude that went far beyond the traditional holiday sentiment. "I'd like to propose a toast," my father said, raising his glass after we were all seated, "to second chances and hard-earned wisdom, and to Wilhelmina, without whom we might have lost everything that truly matters." The tears in everyone's eyes reflected not just the painful journey we had endured, but the profound appreciation for having found our way back to each other. My professional life flourished in unexpected ways following the crisis. The skills I had demonstrated in handling the complex fraud case and business restructuring attracted clients facing similar challenges. I established a specialty practice in financial fraud protection for family-owned businesses, drawing on our experience to help others avoid similar pitfalls. Thompson's Fine Foods implemented new business practices that emphasized transparency and ethical operation. We established a formal board of directors that included trusted outside advisors, created multiple layers of financial oversight, and instituted regular independent audits. These measures not only protected against future fraud, but improved overall business performance by bringing diverse expertise to the decision-making process. Jackson and I developed a genuine partnership, combining his operational knowledge with my legal expertise to guide the business forward. The competitive tension that had characterized our relationship for decades transformed into mutual respect and appreciation for our complementary strengths. One evening, as I was preparing to drive back to my Manhattan apartment after a board meeting, Jackson walked me to my car. "I've been thinking about what you said that day when you first tried to warn us about Gerald," he said. "About not every business decision being made on gut feelings alone." I smiled, remembering the tense exchange. "What about it? You were right, but I was partly right too. The best decisions come from balancing instinct with analysis." He leaned against my car door. "We make a pretty good team that way." "We do," I agreed, surprising myself with how natural that acknowledgement felt now. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve in positive ways. They began to see me not just as their daughter or even their legal advisor, but as a full adult with valuable perspectives on both business and life. I in turn came to appreciate their resilience and willingness to rebuild after such a profound setback. Looking back now, I can see that my simple text response of "understood" to my mother's rejection was pivotal in ways I couldn't have imagined at the time. By stepping back rather than escalating the confrontation, I created space for the truth to emerge naturally. Sometimes the most powerful response to rejection is dignified restraint, allowing actions rather than arguments to ultimately prove your loyalty and worth. The most valuable lesson from our family's ordeal was learning that trust once broken can be rebuilt, but the new structure will never be identical to the original. Our rebuilt family relationships were stronger in many ways, with greater appreciation for each other's perspectives and clearer communication. But they also carried the wisdom that comes from having experienced betrayal and reconciliation, a nuanced understanding that perfect trust is a dangerous illusion. True strength comes not from unwavering confidence that those we love will never hurt or disappoint us, but from the knowledge that even when they do, as all humans inevitably will, the bonds of family can endure, adapt, and ultimately deepen through the process of repair. As I reflect on this journey from estrangement to reconciliation, I wonder about your own experiences with family trust and betrayal. Have you ever had to stand your ground even when it meant temporary rejection? How did you find the courage to do what you believed was right, even when those closest to you couldn't see it? Share your story in the comments below, and remember to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Sometimes the most painful family stories can offer the most valuable lessons about integrity, forgiveness, and the enduring power of love that persists even through our most difficult moments.